I used to be a firm believer in the simple, yet romantic, equation: love is enough. I genuinely thought that as long as the feeling was deep enough, committed enough, every obstacle in a relationship could be overcome. It was my cornerstone. But the older I got, the more I understood that this cornerstone was built on sand. I learned a devastating truth. Loving fiercely isn't the same as loving correctly. You can pour your entire heart into someone, but if the execution is flawed, the connection will eventually short-circuit. My flaw. I loved her with a protector's instinct. While she had grown accustomed to the default concession, I shielded her, I buffered her, and most importantly, I always yielded. My compromises didn't remain acts of generosity. They slowly, imperceptibly morphed into her expectation, her baseline. The scary part, the part that keeps me awake now, is that I let this happen. I was the architect of my own diminishing returns, and I didn't see the blueprint until it was too late. I remember one specific incident. She asked for a small favor, something minor, but I was genuinely exhausted. Still, I nodded, the reflex of the protector kicking in. She offered a quick thanks. The next time, the thanks was gone. The third time, when I finally drew a boundary and said, "I can't," she responded with a silence that felt heavier than an argument. It was the crushing quiet of disappointment, as if I had committed an offense by daring to say no. In that moment, I hated myself. I felt like a failure for not pushing through my fatigue to help her. Now, looking back, I realized that silence was the precise moment I started to lose myself. Brick by brick, I was always the rock, the calm center. She often used to say, "I need a guy like you, because you know how to absorb things." I'd smile, internalizing it as a compliment, a testament to my emotional fortitude. But today, running that phrase back in my head, I heard a different, brutal translation. Sometimes, people don't need you to understand them, they just need you to endure them. And of course, there is a natural, unbending law of physics and emotion. Every reservoir of endurance eventually runs dry. I'm sitting here now, in the aftermath, and the overwhelming feeling isn't heartbreak. It's a strange, unsettling lightness. It's not because I'm emotionally numb. It's because I know with absolute clarity that whether I speak or remain silent, tonight marks the end of an era for us. This is the inflection point. It's either the messy, painful start of a massive change, or the clean, definitive final chapter. If you had walked up to me right now and asked, "Do you still love her?" my answer would be an immediate, unshakable yes. But if you followed up with, "Then why does it hurt?" I would tell you, because I have started to love myself just a little bit more. And that, I've discovered, is the most crucial, defining moment in any relationship. The instant you finally prioritize your own well-being is the moment you gain the necessary clarity to understand if the other person deserves to remain in your story. I held my breath and let the silence stretch. I wasn't quiet because I lacked a response. I was quiet because I knew that anything I said next would likely steer us into a territory neither of us was truly ready to navigate: the unforgiving geography of our fundamental incompatibility. She stared at me, her eyes losing the softness they held when the conversation first began. I could sense her disappointment, a cold, hard stone in the room, even though her voice remained level. "If you truly loved me," she said, her tone carrying the heavy weight of an accusation, "it wouldn't be this difficult." I met her gaze, careful to keep my own voice slow and steady. This was a critical point. I couldn't afford to let my emotions rush the delivery. "Love," I replied calmly, "is not a test to see how much the person you love can endure." That stopped her. She frowned, leaning slightly forward, surprised by the firmness of my boundary. "I'm not asking you to endure anything," she protested. "I just want to see you support me." I let out a slow, quiet exhale. Support. The very essence of support is that it is freely given. But what I felt in this relationship was a subtle, yet powerful, mechanism of control. I felt that if I refused, I would pay a distinct price, a tax levied directly against my commitment to her. "I am always willing to help," I explained, my voice gentle but firm, "if it's something I can do without crossing my own personal, unsustainable limit. But if that help becomes the criteria by which you judge my love for you, then I can't meet that condition." She went completely silent then. I could see the distinct flash of displeasure in her eyes, but she was still working hard to maintain her composure. "So, what you're saying is, you prioritize your own needs above everything else?" I looked at her, not flinching or backing down this time. I needed her to see the conviction in my eyes. "No," I corrected her. "I'm putting my needs next to the ones I believe the person who loves me should also be willing to understand." A different kind of silence settled between us. This wasn't the initial hopeful quiet. where two people pause, believing a gentle solution is just around the corner. This was the ominous silence that signaled one of us was stepping outside the zone of mutual acceptance. I knew exactly what she wanted me to say. Okay, fine, I'll do it. And I knew that if I uttered those words, all the tension would immediately dissipate. But a cold nod of certainty told me that this temporary peace would only serve to defer the real issue. Next time, the request would be bigger, the endurance required would be greater, and if I softened my stance now, I was terrified that one day, I wouldn't recognize the person I had become, all in a desperate attempt to salvage the relationship. I'm choosing to be honest right now, I told her, my voice carrying the weight of a painful decision, because I don't want to get to a point where I'm no longer myself, only to realize that the silence and compliance of today were what made the relationship unsalvageable tomorrow. She didn't respond immediately, but I knew, in that powerful moment even in the absence of words, that the conversation was no longer about a simple favor. It was about our incompatible philosophies of love, and perhaps more importantly, it was the necessary first step toward true change. She leaned back against the chair, the immediate tension in her eyes giving way to a softer, but still resolute, expression. Her voice was level, yet every word resonated with a deeper meaning than she intended. I'm just trying to find a real partner, she began. Someone who's truly willing to share the weight of my struggles. She paused, letting the implications sink in. If you aren't willing to do this simple thing, how can I trust you'll be there for me when things get truly bad? I took in every word, not because she was yelling, but because each syllable carried an emotional currency I was no longer willing to trade. I understood her sentiment perfectly. I used to think the same way. If they love me, they'll prove it. But proving love by sacrificing one's core well-being, that was the devastating mistake I was only now learning to correct. I answered slowly, carefully choosing my words. I'm not abandoning you when things get hard, I clarified. I'm simply refusing to let myself be turned into the person who has to bear everything, just to keep you here. She looked at me, her eyes glistening slightly. I'm not asking you to bear everything. It's just, if you truly loved me, I thought you could be a little more flexible. I nodded gently. I have been flexible, countless times. I just haven't announced it. She fell silent. I knew that sentence cut deep, touching on a history of concessions she had never had to acknowledge. I wasn't trying to assign blame. I was simply stating the facts of the emotional ledger. Love, I continued, my voice steady, can inspire sacrifice, but it should never be allowed to demand silent suffering. If I agree to this now, it won't be because I genuinely want to, but only because I'm afraid of losing you. And if I have to lose myself to maintain a relationship, then sooner or later, I will leave anyway. She lowered her gaze, looking down at her hands. And for the first time in that entire conversation, we both understood that the issue wasn't about a weekend chore or childcare. The core problem was, did we still respect each other enough to continue the love? I added one last, gentle thought, a final summation of my stance. I don't need you to completely understand me. I just need you not to use my love to force me to choose between you and myself. She remained silent, and I didn't press further. We both knew from this point forward, the conversation wouldn't be about persuasion anymore. It would shift toward acceptance. Acceptance that sometimes, love itself is not enough for two people to stay together, especially when one person has started loving in a way that makes the other feel they have to disappear. After a few tense seconds of silence, she finally looked up. The light had completely left her eyes, replaced by a mixture of hurt and tightly coiled resentment. So, you think I'm trying to manipulate you? Her voice was low but sharp, laced with accusation. I didn't rush my reply. I knew that blunt honesty, delivered too quickly, often masks the underlying message. I kept my tone soft, aiming for clarity over confrontation. I think, I said gently, that you're used to me always saying yes, and when I finally stop, you perceive it as a rejection of you. But what I'm actually doing is simply holding on to a piece of me. She bit her lip. I watched the emotion in her eyes shift, no longer hopeful, but defensive. Her pride stung. I just wanted to know if you could be the person I can truly rely on, she insisted. I kept my voice low and steady. I can absolutely be the person you rely on, but I can't be the person who has to stay standing even when my own foundations are shaking. She didn't have an immediate answer. Her breathing hitched, a tiny physical expression of the emotional overload. Then, almost as a reflex, she challenged me. So, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? I looked at her. It was a long, steady look, heavier than usual. I would ask the person I love if they could help me, instead of taking it as a given that they must. A beat of silence followed. A gap in the conversation that didn't just feel distant, it felt empty. A sudden, profound sense of loss settling between us. She spoke again, her voice much quieter this time. Do you think I'm selfish? I shook my head slowly. I think you're exhausted. And when people are exhausted, they often unknowingly place their expectations onto the person closest to them. She stared at me for a long time, then whispered a final, crucial question. And if the person closest to you refuses? I answered, softly but clearly, delivering the core truth of my awakening. Then perhaps, instead of blaming them for not loving you enough, we should ask ourselves how many burdens we've unknowingly placed on them that we wouldn't want to carry ourselves. This time, she had nothing left to say, and I remained silent as well. A strange, complex emotion swelled inside me, relief at finally having voiced the necessary truth, and a bitter sadness in understanding that this conversation would not end the way either of us had once hoped. There are moments that don't need an official announcement, yet both parties know, instinctively, that something fundamental has cracked, and I had a premonition. The way things unfolded after tonight would never be the same again. She remained motionless for a considerable time after my statement. I knew she was desperately trying to keep her composure, but sometimes, silence is a more definitive answer than any spoken word. Finally, she let out a slow, quiet breath, then asked, "So, if you feel this way, do you think this relationship can actually continue?" It wasn't a question seeking an answer. It was a confirmation, a mutual acknowledgement that we had reached an unavoidable juncture, where one of us had to make a defining choice. I didn't reply immediately. A montage of memories flickered through my mind, the easy days, the times she rested her head on my shoulder and said my presence was enough. But then, the clarity hit me. We had forgotten that love isn't just about leaning on each other. It's about knowing when to stand firm for the other person, and when to let them stand for themselves. I spoke slowly, deliberately. I still want to continue, but not in a way where one person has to sacrifice their spirit and the other person treats it as a given. She looked at me, her eyes becoming slightly watery. I don't think I treat it as a given. I'm just under so much pressure. You know that, I nodded. I do know, and I have consistently tried to understand. I paused for a critical moment. It's just, sometimes I need you to understand me, too. She dropped her head, her shoulders slightly trembling. So, you're saying that if you refuse to do this, I have to figure it out on my own? I gave her my honest final position. I will help you, if I choose to help. Not because I'm obligated or coerced, but because I genuinely want to. But if you need me to take on that responsibility as a test of my commitment, then I can't. She looked up, her expression a mix of bewilderment and pain. I just want to know, when life gets genuinely hard, will you still choose to stay? I looked straight at her, this time refusing to look away. If one day you hit true rock bottom, I will stay because you need me. But if you try to prove my love by making me endure something that isn't mine to carry, then I will choose to leave, before I lose the clarity and peace required to love you the way you deserve. In that moment, she said nothing more, and I didn't either. There are certain sentences, once spoken, that require no response because the listener has already understood the devastating weight of the truth. I felt a part of her spirit sink, and a part of mine sank with it. Not because the love was gone, but because I finally understood that, sometimes, in order to preserve your self-respect within love, you must accept the risk of losing the person you love entirely. After that statement, I realized the conversation had moved past the point of seeking a resolution. It felt more like a mutual confirmation that we were both emotionally exhausted. The only difference being who finally had the courage to voice it aloud. She remained completely still. I could see the subtle effort it took for her not to cry. It wasn't about weakness. It was the sting of betrayal she felt, realizing that the one person she believed would always yield was finally choosing to place his own emotional needs on equal footing with hers. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice quiet but clear. So, if you've drawn this line, do you think this relationship can actually last? That question was less about seeking information and more about demanding validation. It was an attempt to make me say the words she felt were inevitable. I looked directly into her eyes. For the first time since the conversation began, I didn't attempt to soften the blow or sugarcoat the truth. I don't want to leave, I stated, but if tonight forces me to choose between keeping you and keeping myself, I have to choose to keep myself first. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't react fiercely. Perhaps, deep down, she knew I was right. Perhaps she, too, sensed that it was time to confront the long-avoided truth. Love is only meaningful if it doesn't require someone to lose their soul to maintain it. I gave my final closing remark. I am capable of helping you, if that is my choice. But if you leverage our relationship to turn that help into an obligation, then it stops being a favor. It becomes emotional coercion, and at this point, I cannot accept that, even if it is for you. She sat there, her hands clenching, then slowly releasing. I watched her take a deep, visible breath, as if gathering the last remnants of her courage to ask, "So, you are really going to say no?" I answered her directly, without hesitation or euphemism. This time, it is no, and if that makes you believe we can't continue, then perhaps we have to accept that. The atmosphere between us was no longer strained. Instead, it was replaced by an almost unbearable stillness, a kind of quiet that comes when a person finally stops struggling to hold on to something they no longer have the strength to carry. She said nothing more. Neither did I. I stood up, not as a dramatic exit, but because I knew that if I stayed seated and tried to explain myself any further, I would start to compromise. And tonight, I knew I had to stop compromising. And sometimes, the simple act of standing up carries more weight than 1,000 words. I didn't utter another word after that. The moment I rose to my feet, I felt an intense sensation of unburdening, like I was finally setting down something I had strained to carry for far too long. And it wasn't the relationship itself. It was the silent part of my soul that was always terrified of causing pain. She watched me. Her eyes no longer held judgment or expectation. They were just profoundly tired. Tired in the way of someone who has clutched something too tightly, until, finally letting go, they have no strength left to grasp it back. "If you could go back in time," she asked. Her voice hushed. "Would you still choose to stay silent until tonight?" I looked at her, my expression calm. No. I would have spoken up sooner, so that we wouldn't have to reach this exact, final moment, to be forced to stop. She didn't respond. Perhaps there was nothing left to add. Perhaps, finally, she understood that the one who remained silent the longest in this story wasn't the one who felt the least, but the one who had felt too much. I walked toward the door, each step deliberate. Every move was heavy, not with the weight of loss, but with the sober acceptance that sometimes, holding on hurts both people far more than letting go. I paused. I didn't turn around, but I knew she was watching me. "I once chose silence to keep you by my side," I said, my voice low and resonant. "Today, I'm choosing to speak, to keep the last piece of myself intact." Behind me, no sound came. Perhaps she wanted to call me back, or perhaps she understood that if either of us spoke now, we would say something that would be impossible to forget later. I put my hand on the doorknob. I took a deep breath, not to calm myself, but to honor the gravity of the moment. The instant a man chooses to walk away, not because the love is gone, but because staying would twist that love into something unrecognizable. The door closed softly behind me. There was no loud crash, just a small sound, quiet enough for me to understand that some endings don't need to be shouted, but they will still keep you awake for many nights to come. I walked on, not quickly, not slowly, just the pace of a person who has finally learned that in love, if one person has to sacrifice their entire self to keep the other, then they are truly losing both.